Hello and welcome to Video Revealed. I'm Colin Smith. These are my critical animation tips in Adobe Premiere Pro. All right, it seems that some newer users have problems with keyframes. I'm going to show you some important things, some tips, how to fix stuff, and hopefully you'll get something out of this. These are the kinds of things that I count on, because occasionally I'll come up in the middle of an animation, I'll be having a problem. I'm not sure why something is doing what it's doing. So let's have a look. First one is just some simple motion keyframing stuff that really is important to understand. First thing is, every animation takes two keyframes. It's a difference between one thing and another. From here to there, scale from here to there, opacity from here to there, always two. So if you want something to fade in and fade out, that's two different animations. That's 4 keyframes. Let's have a look. Okay, I've got a little graphic that comes up on the screen. Right now, there is no animation. It just pops up on the screen and it goes away. So I'll select it and go to the effects controls, and I'll change my workspace. This is the Essentials workspace, which is fine. It's nice and neat and tidy, but this size here, from here to here, is way too small to work with keyframes. So drag the edge over to here, and you can even drag the project bin and give yourself some more room. I have already done this, and I saved this in a workspace I call home base. It just gives me more room. So we'll go back to where our graphic is, select it, and we're in the effects controls where we get things like motion, opacity, and stuff like that. Now, the reason I'm getting more of these is because this is an essential graphics graphic, and you get all of the graphic settings, but I'm just going to concentrate down here because this pertains to every single object you drop in the timeline. So let's just look at fading in and fading out with opacity. So when the stopwatch is white and not filled in, there are no keyframes. So if I change this to 50%, 56, whatever, and play, there's no animation. Again, an animation is between two keyframes. Well, how do you make two keyframes? You have to make your first keyframe. Every single change you make after this creates a new keyframe. That's a blessing and a curse. It's a curse when you didn't mean to make a second keyframe and you don't know where it is. So that one I can't help you with. You just have to hunt for where that keyframe, where something shouldn't be changing. But let's go back and look at this. So what I usually do when the play hit is at the beginning and I want to do an animation from 0 to 100% opacity, I'll click on the stopwatch even though I don't want it at 100%, and then I'll just drag that over there and then change this to 0. Now I've got one keyframe at 0, and these little buttons here take you to the next keyframe, and the next one is 100%. So if I press play, it fades onto the screen. Fades up. Now let's fade it out. And the first thing some people will do is they'll change this from 100% to 0. Go back and play, 0 to 100, and whoa! How come it's fading out right away? Well, it's fading from 100 from here to 0 there. Remember, 2 keyframes to animate in. I've got to have 2 keyframes to animate out. So right now, as soon as it ends at 100% here, it's going to 0, so it's constantly changing. So I just need another keyframe, and if I drag this, I like to drag these numbers rather than type them in sometimes. Now I've got a fade in and a fade out. Fade in, fade out. And you can select both of these and move them around. To scale them, you have to select one and move it. This is also how I like to end my animation. Instead of putting the playhead at the end, which means I don't see the graphic anymore, I like to draw my keyframes inside, select both of them, and then just drag that to the end. So I know now it's going to go from 0 to 100, hold, and 0 to 100, 100 to 0. I know this might be just rudimentary for some people, but some users are having trouble with these kinds of things. Now, if you don't want it to fade out, then you can get rid of that and just have 2 keyframes. If you ever want to remove these keyframes, let's say, for example, you were having trouble. You would get to here, and although it's at the end, the opacity is changing. How can that happen if there are no keyframes here? Well, in the little 3-button menu, 3-line menu, pin to clip is turned on. So if we deselect that, we can zoom out further than the end of the clip. See, this is where our clip starts and our clip ends. You might actually have a keyframe way out here. How did you get a keyframe out there? Maybe the object you were animating was a longer duration. You added a keyframe and then you trimmed it. That didn't get rid of that keyframe. It's still active. So you can unpin, zoom out, select it and delete it, or try this. Let's go back to pinning the clip. Let's say I know that this is my animation, and after this, I don't want anything to happen. First of all, I'm going to find a place. I'll hold the Shift key down and I'll jump to a place where I know a keyframe is. So that's where the keyframe is. I'll select this and I'll copy it. Then I'll click on the stopwatch, click OK to delete everything. Now it's impossible for a keyframe to exist, even if it was outside of the pinned area. Now, because my playhead is in the same place, I'll paste, and there it is. That's a great way just to clean everything up. You're looking at it and you don't know, why is it? I know that my animations between these keyframes are correct. Why is it? Oh, I know what. I'll just copy that information, delete it, and paste it back in, and it gets rid of everything. That's good. Okay. All right. Let's get rid of our opacity. I'll click there, answer OK, take it back up to 100. Now let's look at scale. And scales up and down. But even though you did not intend on a second property, anchor point is there and you can't get rid of it. Scaling will always use the anchor point. And where is the anchor point? If you click on the word motion, you'll see that little blue target show up. And you can click and move that around. So right now when you're scaling, it's scaling from that point. But it doesn't make sense with this animation. I want the scale to occur maybe from the bottom of this area where the train is coming up. I want the whole thing to scale. So I can move that to that point. Now when I scale, it's going to scale from there. Ooh, that's better. So again, I'll zoom back to 100%. Click, drop my keyframe, 0. Just like opacity. Whoop, and it goes up. Whoop, there it is. Maybe a little faster. And if you wanted to make this a little bit more organic, you can select the keyframes, right-click on them, and change them to different styles. I'm just going to choose Bezier right now, and you can see it's a little bit smoother. Okay. Now let's talk about scale with the anchor point of the clip, because every clip also has an anchor point. So if I click on the clip, click on motion, it's the same thing. It's in the center. So if I scale this, it scales from the center. And what you're looking at here, if we zoom out, this is a big 4K clip in an HD timeline. I just like working with larger clips because then I can scale them without having to worry about the edges. So I'm going to move my anchor point. You can see when I'm zoomed out, I can actually move the move the anchor point. Make sure I do it all in one move. You see the little icon that shows up. When I scale now, it's going to scale to that point there. This is a little bit harder to manage. But I could do that. and scale that up to her face. Or, although this is a way to scale, it's way too unpredictable. It's much better to change scale and position information. So I'll get rid of that. In fact, I'll go back up here and put everything back in. And I'm not even going to pay attention to the anchor point at this time. I'm going to start way over here where she's not in the picture. Position and scale. And then I'll move this over, move that up, and I can go back to fitting this in. I don't need it small anymore. And maybe scale her a little bit more. Oops. Did you see what I did? I forgot to add the keyframe for the first one. Oh man, I can't tell you how many times I do this. So let's zero these out. And then that adds the keyframe, but I wanted her not in the picture. Okay, so now it goes from there to there. And again, like before, we can select these first ones, right click and ease out, select these two and ease in. So now our animation looks like this. Boom, and maybe move that daily commute a little bit sooner. Oh, maybe not that soon. Okay, that's one example. Now let's go to an example where the position is going to be a different effect. So again, I've got a 4K clip inside an HD timeline. And if we change the scale of this, that's the clip right there. Oh, and I've got position information. I was messing around with this, so let me get rid of all of that. Okay. And we'll take this to 50%. So I want this to scale. I want to zoom in from 50% because remember, this is an HD clip or a 4K clip in an HD timeline. So it's zoomed out. It fills the screen. So I'll hit scale and then I'll zoom in to 100%. And the problem with doing it that way, just with no position, is when it zooms in, we don't really see what he's standing on. It's a little bit distracting. I don't think that works the best. So we'll go back to the first one and add a position keyframe. So now I've got two keyframes, one for position, one for scale. And then this one I'll drag up because that's the position I want. All right, but maybe I want to hold on that zoomed out position. So I'll select all four of them, move that over and make the animation closer together. So now it zooms into him just when he's starting to do that. And what we could do is follow him along maybe. So at this point here, I'm just going to drag the X coordinates. So this is just one keyframe because we're not changing the scale. We zoom in, whoop, and now we follow that along. Just gives it a little bit more movement. And like before, we can add some interpolation. So we're going to ease into this. And when I show you these, I'm going to open up scale and open up position. And let's zoom in, just hitting my plus key. And you can see how robotic this is when these are linear keyframes, just a regular triangle. But watch what happens. I'm going to show you, I'll right click and choose just Bezier, and you can see what it does. Now let's look at the zoom. It's smooth, but watch what happens when I change the first two to ease out and the second ones to ease in. Now I've got this nice ramp going on here. And it follows it along. For this, I didn't have to worry about the anchor point at all, because everything I was doing was zooming from the center and zooming up and changing the position up and down. So I didn't have to worry about it. In fact, you don't even have to think about anchor point unless the animation is doing something you didn't want it to do. Then that's when you have to look at the anchor point. All right, next example is rotation. And with this example, I've got a video where I centered it in the middle and removed any movement. The camera had a little bit of movement to it. And I just wanted to show you that if I rotate this around the center, it's perfectly rotating around the center. Now, with rotation, you only have one property, and that's the rotation property. So we could set maybe where she's jumping like this. We set a rotation property here instead of at the beginning. And I'll show you why in a second. So she lands down here, and we'll change this to maybe 1 time. So we'll type 360. And you can see that it changes to 1 revolution. If I put the first keyframe at the beginning, then it would start animating at the beginning, which we don't want. We want it to animate where she's jumping up, and when she finishes jumping, it stops. Same as before, ease out, ease in. And I've added a graphic over top of this with some circles. Boom. All right, now let's look at rotation with an anchor point. So I've got this graphic here over top, and I have a clip of this VR woman, and I want to animate this little contraption that she's sitting on. So I have added a little bit of a mask to this and a background in here so that I could animate just her. It was too much work to key her out completely because she's moving before. So let me go back to positioning this where it is by default. So when I rotate her now, the rotation happens based on that anchor point. But I want it to seem like there's a contraption down here moving that around. So I'll move the anchor point down here, and I'm going to go to, this is where I want her to end. So this is another tip I always use. Right now, this rotation is 0, but maybe it's something more complex, like 38.2. Instead of going to 0 and then going back, instead I'll move the playhead to where this is the correct rotation, and I'll add a keyframe. So that's where I want her to end up. I'll go back to the beginning, and now I'll change the rotation value and bring her from the bottom. So now she comes up and it rotates in. Same as before, ease out, ease in. All right, now a little bit more complex. I've got an example here of several different layers of a Photoshop file with an arm, body, a ball, and another arm. I want it to look like he's going to throw the basket. And I've made this in 4 different parts so I can animate them. I changed the anchor point already so that when I rotate it, it's rotating from the correct place. And I'll show you what I did. I'll click on the program window and I'll show the guides. And I added guides, and I'll put a link to a description of where the guides are. And if we zoom in, and I click on motion, you can see I move the anchor point there. And if you go to the ball, it's the same thing. Even though the ball is over here, its anchor point is the same place. The body doesn't need any animation, but the other arm does too. So all three of these are in the same place. So if I go back to the first one, remember this is where I want it to end. So I'll go to the point of where this ends. Let me just get rid of the guides, and I'll add a rotation, move backwards, maybe add another one in here, and go into the middle, and now drag that arm back. So he starts forward, moves back, and then moves forward. And maybe that's a little bit too quick. All right, so let's do the same. Ease out. We'll do ease out on that one too, and ease in. So, and to copy all the keyframes, all you have to do is click on the name. Don't click on the stopwatch or you'll deselect everything. Get rid of the keyframes, but you could select all of these and copy that. Select the ball, select motion, paste. Select the bottom one, select motion, paste. Now all three are going to move at the same time. Now some of you might be thinking that it might be easier to use copy and paste attributes. So where you select the first one, copy it, select the other two, right click and choose paste attributes. Problem is you have to use all of the motion. You can't separate rotation. So when you paste all of the same rotation and anchor point, it ends up like this. It doesn't work. Next up is a really useful keyframe known as the hold keyframe. So in this example, I've got students in a 4K clip in an HD timeline. And what that allows me to do is to move this around and reframe different people. Okay, so let me go back to where I was. And I'm going to start here, and I'll set a position keyframe. Let's move over to here, and I'll move over to this guy. Oh, I didn't realize I had so much in the bottom. So let me move. So there's her, first student, then him, and then let's go hunting for someone else. Maybe those few people up there. Maybe kind of move these around. And then the last one, we've got someone who wasn't there at the beginning, but he's going to be there in a second. There. Okay, so if we play this right now, it works, it moves around, but that's not what I wanted. I wanted something that looks like a jump cut. So I'll select all of these, right click, and change this to a hold keyframe. Now watch what happens. There is some movement in the camera, but now it's going to jump to the next person. Boom, right like that. Looks like a completely different camera angle. Boom, up to them. I wish they were in focus, but they're not. I can't fix that. And then we jump to the last person. Boom, yeah. So remember, the camera is not static. This shot itself is moving around. That guy, this last guy wasn't in the shot when it began, and it had panned over to include him. But the hold keyframes are really good when you don't want to actually go in and have to draw. Remember I said animations require 2 keyframes? Well, this is a way to get around that. If you didn't have a hold keyframe, you would have to have a position and then a position and a position right beside each other. But hold keyframes only change when that happens. All right. Now, the last example, I just wanted to have some fun. Check this out. This is throwing a beach ball around, and it does not look normal. There's something odd happening to the way the camera is moving. And what's happening is the center of the ball is always in the middle of the frame. And to show you that, I'll turn on my guides, and I'll turn on a guide that I created for the center. So now look at this. It's in the center the whole time. Now, if you wanted to do this easily, use the tracking tools in After Effects. There's no real good tracking inside Premiere Pro. You have to do this manually, but I just wanted to show you, you can do these kinds of effects. Let me show you how I did this. Oh, and by the way, I drew a little graphic here too. And it looks like it's tracking. It's not. It looks like it's tracking because that graphic is just sitting there static in the middle of the screen. The frame is moving, okay? So let me turn that off, turn back this on, click on my clip, and look at how many keyframes I have here. I manually keyframe that whole thing. So let me select all of these. Well, I'll just click on position and it'll get rid of them. And then I'll add a position keyframe again. So what you do is you can do this by moving these numbers. In this example, I found it easier to move the actual clip in here. To do that, you have to double click on it. And once you double click on it, then you can move it. Oh, my graphic is moving here. So I'm going to have to lock that. So I'm moving this around. And I don't care about the anchor point. So the first keyframe is here. And if you move your mouse into this area and you use a scroll wheel or a trackpad, and then move the net, just keep moving ahead and then move the ball into the center. In fact, if you double click on the name up here, you can make this larger. And if you wanted to do this frame by frame, it would be much more accurate. I'm moving about 3 to 5 frames at a time. And that's what it's doing. I'll just go backwards. It's following that along. Double click on the name again to change the size. Let me bring back my keyframes. I should have copied those. Okay, and I wanted to show you, I'm going to compare both of these. All right, so on the left, it looks very calm. There's something about the energy on the right where it's just following the ball. It just looks different. So there you go. I call those critical tips because they're really important to get you out of a problem when you're having a problem. Real simple ways to create animations and some rules that you have to follow to get good animations. I'll also put a link in the description for natural animations and also another one about if you look at a keyframe. Let's do something like a position keyframe. There's temporal and spatial. I'll put a link in the description for another tutorial about that spatial keyframes, where if you're trying to make something look mechanical and it's wandering all over, it's spatial. Hey, if you're new to Video Revealed and you have found this informative, take a moment and subscribe. You want to support us more, you can do that on VideoRevealed.com/shop. Donate once monthly. We love all of our wonderful donors. Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate it. Till next time, I'm Colin Smith, and it's my job to compile all the things that I've learned over the years and put them into a little tutorial that you might find useful.